This is HOA craze. I did not raise my voice, I raised my evidence packet. I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour shift, and Helen Parker was already standing at the curb with a clipboard and a tow yard rate sheet folded in her hand. She shoved the paper toward my face, her bright phone case flashing in the last of the daylight, and her voice came out sharp and triumphant. "You are going to pay the maximum fine." Her smile widened, and she tapped the rate sheet with one finger. "I love the storage fees," she added, like she was announcing a bonus at work. I stepped out of my truck and saw the tire clamp locked onto my front driver's side wheel, the thick metal arm clamped down tight, the yellow warning sticker slapped across the windshield with no readable text but plenty of bold exclamation marks. Helen stood with her arms crossed, her black pixie cut catching the last slice of sun, her blue light jacket zipped all the way up even though it was only cool, not cold. She had her pink bucket hat tilted back like she was ready for a photo op. I glanced at the clamp, then at her, and I could feel the anger rising, but I kept my face blank. I work nights as a regional field technician for a telecom contractor, which means I am always on a deadline, always driving between sites, and always one late arrival away from a written warning. Losing my truck for even a day could cost me my job. Helen tapped her phone case against the clipboard and stepped closer. "This is what happens when you ignore the guest pass policy," she said. "I did not ignore anything," I told her. "I live here. I have a resident decal." She shook her head slowly, like she was explaining multiplication to a child. "Your guest parked in a reserved spot last week, and you did not display the temporary pass on the dashboard. That is a violation. Now you are parked in a fire lane tonight, which is a second violation. The boot stays on until you pay the fine and the tow yard pre-authorization hold." I looked at the curb. There was no red paint, no signage, no cone. I was in my own driveway. I told her that and she laughed, a short bark of sound. "The fire lane designation was updated in the minutes last month," she said. "You should read them." I pulled out my phone and opened the Sequoia Terrace Design Review Association portal, but the page would not load. Helen noticed and smiled wider. "The portal is down for maintenance," she said. "You will have to come to the office tomorrow and request a paper copy. There is a processing fee." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. I asked her who authorized the boot. She held up the clipboard and showed me a work order, with a scrawled signature at the bottom. No name I recognized, just a loop and a line. "We have a contract with a certified vendor," she said. "They have blanket authorization for any vehicle in violation." I asked to see the contract. She pulled the clipboard back against her chest. "That is proprietary," she said. "You can file a records request, but it takes 30 days, and there is a per-page fee." I could feel my hands starting to shake, so I shoved them into my jacket pockets. I asked her how much the fine was. She flipped a page on the clipboard and ran her finger down a column. $250 for the guest pass violation, another $250 for the fire lane, and a $75 boot application fee, she said. "Plus, if the boot stays on past midnight, the tow yard starts charging storage at $50 per day, even though the vehicle is still on your property." I stared at her. "That is theft," I said. She shrugged. "That is policy," she said. "Keep talking, I love adding notes." I walked around the truck and checked the guest parking spaces across the street. Every single one was empty. I pointed that out to Helen. She did not even look. "The violation already occurred," she said. "We do not retroactively cancel fines just because the spot is available now." I asked her why I was not notified before the boot was applied. She tapped her phone case against the clipboard again. "We sent an email," she said, "and we posted a notice on the portal." I reminded her that the portal was down. She smiled. "Not my problem," she said. I could see a couple standing on their porch 2 houses down, watching the whole scene like it was a streaming series. The woman had her arms folded, and the guy was leaning on the railing with a coffee cup in his hand. Helen followed my gaze and waved at them. A little pageant wave, fingers wiggling. They did not wave back. I pulled out my phone again and called the non-emergency police line. Helen heard the ringtone and her smile got sharper. "Go ahead," she said. "They will tell you the same thing. This is a civil matter." The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation: the boot, the questionable fire lane, the lack of notice. The dispatcher sounded tired. "Sir, if it is on private property and the HOA has a vendor contract, we cannot intervene," she said. "You will need to resolve it through the association or take it to small claims court." I thanked her and hung up. Helen was already writing something on her clipboard, her pen moving fast, her handwriting tight and angular. I asked her what she was writing. She did not look up. "Incident log," she said. You just attempted to involve law enforcement in a frivolous complaint. That is harassment of a board member. I could add that to your file. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You were going to add everything to my file anyway, I said. She looked up and met my eyes. Exactly, she said. Keep talking. I love adding notes. I asked her how I was supposed to get to work in the morning if my truck was immobilized. She tapped the tow yard rate sheet against the clipboard. You pay the fines tonight, the boot comes off in the morning, she said. Or you call the tow yard and arrange transport to their facility, and you can settle the bill there. I asked her where the tow yard was. She glanced at the rate sheet. Bothell, she said. About 20 minutes away. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 7. I had to be on site by 6 in the morning, which meant leaving my house no later than 5:30. If I paid the fines tonight, I would be out $575, and I had no guarantee the boot would actually come off by morning. If I did not pay, the truck would get towed, and I would be paying storage fees on top of everything else. Plus, I would miss my shift and probably lose my job. I felt the anger tightening in my chest, but I forced myself to think. I asked Helen for a receipt. She blinked. For what? She said. For the fines, I said. If I pay you tonight, I want a receipt with a timestamp and a breakdown. She frowned. You do not pay me, she said. You pay the vendor. They will email you a receipt. I asked her for the vendor contact information. She flipped another page on the clipboard and rattled off a phone number. I typed it into my phone and called. The line rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message with my name, address, and a request for immediate boot removal, then hung up. Helen was already walking back toward her car, a silver sedan parked 2 houses down. I called after her and asked when the boot would be removed. She turned and called back over her shoulder. When you pay, she said. I asked her how I was supposed to pay if no one answered the phone. She shrugged and opened her car door. Not my problem, she said. I watched her drive away, her taillights bright in the dimming evening, and I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I had no way to pay, no way to get the boot off, and no way to get to work in the morning. I walked back to the truck and crouched down beside the clamp. The metal was thick and industrial, the kind of thing you would need a grinder to cut through, and I was not about to do that. I pulled out my phone and took a dozen photos from every angle. The clamp, the wheel, the sticker, the driveway, the curb with no red paint, the empty guest parking spaces across the street. Then I walked to the mailbox and checked for any notices. Nothing. I opened the Sequoia Terrace portal on my phone again and tried to load the violation history. Still down. I went inside and opened my laptop, logged into my email, and searched for anything from the HOA or the tow vendor. Nothing in the last week. I checked spam. Nothing. I opened the association website and clicked through to the member documents section. The page loaded, but every file link returned an error. I tried the contact page and filled out a form requesting a copy of the vendor contract and the updated fire lane map. The form submitted, and I got an auto reply saying my request had been received and would be processed within 30 business days. I closed the laptop and sat at the kitchen table, my hands still shaking. I could feel the time pressure crushing down on me. The management portal was down, and I had to deliver paper proof in person today if I wanted any chance of getting this resolved before my shift started. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my jacket, and I drove my girlfriend's car to the HOA office, a small single-story building at the edge of the neighborhood with a handful of parking spaces and a sad little sign that said Sequoia Terrace Design Review Association in brass letters. The office was dark. I tried the door. Locked. I checked the hours posted on the window. Monday through Thursday, 9 to 4. It was Wednesday night. I pulled out my phone and called the main office number. Voicemail. I left another message, this time angrier, my voice tight, and I demanded a callback within the hour. Then I drove back home and parked my girlfriend's car in the driveway beside my immobilized truck. The boot was still there, the yellow sticker still bright against the windshield. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at it, and I felt the anger turning into something colder and sharper. I was not going to let Helen bury me in notices and fees. I was going to fight this, and I was going to win. I just needed a plan. I spent the rest of the evening digging through my files. I found the original HOA welcome packet from when I moved in 2 years ago, a thick stack of paper with bylaws, covenants, and a parking policy addendum. I read through the parking section 3 times. Guest passes were required for overnight parking in designated guest spaces, but there was no mention of boots, no mention of TOW on-site authorization, and no mention of fire lane designations in driveways. I highlighted every relevant sentence and took photos of every page. Then I opened my bank app and checked my transaction history. I found the guest pass I had purchased 6 months ago, a $20 fee paid directly to the HOA, and I had the receipt saved in my email. I forwarded it to myself with a subject line that said Guest Pass Receipt Proof and added it to a new folder on my phone, labeled HOA Evidence. I was building a timeline, a paper trail, and I was going to use it to rip Helen's story apart. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30 and checked my phone. No call back from the HOA office, no email from the tow vendor, no update on the portal. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my thin flashlight clipped to my pocket out of habit, my black trucker cap pulled low. I called my supervisor and explained the situation. He was not happy, but he gave me until noon to resolve it and get to the site. After noon, he said, I would be written up. I thanked him and hung up, then I grabbed my folder of printed documents and drove my girlfriend's car back to the HOA office. This time, the lights were on. I parked and walked to the door, and I could see Helen inside, sitting at a desk with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other. I pushed the door open, and she looked up, her face shifting from bored to annoyed in half a second. You need an appointment, she said. I told her I needed the boot removed immediately. She set her coffee cup down and folded her hands on the desk. Did you pay the fines? She asked. I told her I tried to call the vendor. No answer, no callback, no way to pay. She shrugged. Not my problem, she said. I opened my folder and pulled out the parking policy addendum. I set it on the desk in front of her and pointed to the highlighted sections. There is no mention of boots, no mention of fire lanes and driveways, and no mention of tow on-site authorization, I said. This policy does not support what you did last night. She glanced at the paper, then pushed it back toward me. The policy was updated, she said. You did not read the minutes. I asked her to show me the minutes. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thin binder, flipped to a page near the back, and tapped a paragraph with one finger. Right there, she said. Fire lane designations expanded to include all driveways within 50 feet of a hydrant. I read the paragraph. It was vague, barely 2 sentences, and there was no map, no list of affected addresses, no notice requirement. I asked her when this was approved. She checked the date at the top of the page. Last month, she said. I asked her how homeowners were notified. She closed the binder. Email and portal, she said. Same as always. I pulled out my phone and showed her my email search results. No emails from the HOA in the last 60 days, I said. She glanced at the screen and shrugged. Maybe it went to spam, she said. I told her I checked spam. She picked up her coffee cup and took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. Like I said, she said, not my problem. You are responsible for staying informed. I asked her for a copy of the updated policy and the fire lane map. She set the coffee cup down, and I could see her hand shaking slightly, a tiny tremor that she tried to hide by gripping the handle tighter. That requires a records request, she said. 30-day processing period. Per page fees. I told her that was retaliatory. She smiled, cold and tight. That is procedure, she said. If you have a complaint, you can file it with the board. I asked her when the next board meeting was. She opened a calendar on her computer and clicked through a few screens. 3 weeks, she said. I told her I needed this resolved today. She laughed, short and sharp. Then you should have read the minutes, she said. I felt the anger rising again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had taken the night before. I showed her the curb with no red paint, the empty guest parking spaces, the driveway with no hydrant within 50 feet. She glanced at the screen and waved one hand dismissively. The hydrant is across the street, she said. That counts. I zoomed in on one of the photos and showed her the distance. That is at least 70 feet, I said. She shrugged. I am not a surveyor, she said. If you want to dispute the measurement, you can hire one and submit the results with your appeal. I asked her how much the appeal would cost. She opened another drawer and pulled out a fee schedule, a laminated card with tiny print. $250, she said. Non-refundable. I stared at her, and I could feel the cold knot in my stomach tightening. This was a shakedown, plain and simple, and Helen was enjoying every second of it. I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk, and I wanted to see how far she would go. Helen leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. You are wasting my time, she said. Pay the fines, file an appeal if you want, and move on. I asked her what happened if I refused to pay. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her face suddenly sharp and focused. Then the boot stays on, the tow yard picks up your truck, and the storage fees start piling up, she said. $50 a day, plus impound fees, plus processing fees. You will be at $2,000 within a month, and we will put a lien on your property to recover the costs. I asked her if the HOA had the legal authority to do that. She smiled, wide and cold. Read the covenants, she said. Every homeowner agrees to binding arbitration and cost recovery for violations. You signed it when you bought the house. I felt my hands curling into fists, so I shoved them back into my pockets. I asked her for the name of the HOA attorney. She wrote it on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. Good luck, she said. He charges $400 an hour, and he does not take calls from homeowners, only the board. I picked up the sticky note and walked out. I sat in my girlfriend's car and called the attorney's office. The receptionist was polite but firm. We represent the association, not individual homeowners, she said. If you have a legal question, you will need to retain your own counsel. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called a local attorney I had found online, someone who advertised HOA dispute representation. The consultation was free, so I booked a slot for that afternoon and drove home. My truck was still sitting in the driveway, the boot still locked tight, the yellow sticker still bright. I took more photos, then I went inside and printed every document I had, every email, every receipt, every policy page, every photo. I organized them into a timeline packet, starting with the day I moved in and ending with this morning's confrontation. I noted every inconsistency, every missing notice, every procedural failure. I was building my trump card, and I was not going to reveal it until I had Helen and the board backed into a corner with no way out. The attorney consultation was short but useful. She reviewed my documents and nodded slowly. You have a strong case for improper notice and selective enforcement, she said. The fire lane designation is questionable, the boot authorization is questionable, and the fee structure looks punitive rather than remedial. I asked her what my options were. She leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against the desk. You can file a small claims suit for the fines and the boot removal costs, she said. You can also file a complaint with the State Consumer Protection Office if you believe the HOA is engaging in predatory practices. And you can request an emergency hearing with the board to dispute the violation before the fees escalate. I asked her which option was fastest. She checked her calendar. Emergency hearing, she said. The board is required to respond within 72 hours if you cite health and safety concerns. I asked her what counted as health and safety. She smiled. Losing your job because your vehicle is immobilized, she said. That affects your livelihood, which is a recognized concern under Washington law. I thanked her and left, my mind already racing through the next steps. I drove back to the HOA office and walked in without knocking. Helen looked up from her desk, her face already shifting into that annoyed expression. You again, she said. I told her I was requesting an emergency board hearing under the health and safety provision of the bylaws. She blinked, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. What provision? She said. I pulled out my printed copy of the bylaws and showed her the section, highlighted in yellow. Right there, I said. Any homeowner facing imminent harm to health, safety, or livelihood can request an emergency hearing within 72 hours. She read the section, her lips moving slightly, then she looked up. That is for things like broken pipes or structural damage, she said, not parking disputes. I told her the bylaw did not specify. She set the paper down and crossed her arms. I will bring it to the board, she said, but I am telling you right now, they are going to say no. I asked her for the board president's contact information. She wrote it on another sticky note, her pen pressing hard enough to tear the paper slightly, and she slid it across the desk without a word. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama and satisfying payback. I called the board president that afternoon, a guy named Rick who sounded tired and distracted. I explained the situation, the boot, the questionable fire lane, the lack of notice, the emergency hearing request. He sighed, long and loud. Helen mentioned you might call, he said. Look, I am not going to overrule her on a parking violation. The board voted to expand enforcement last quarter, and we gave her discretion to handle violations as she sees fit. I asked him if he had read the minutes from last month. He paused. What about them? He said. I told him the fire lane designation was vague, unenforceable, and possibly illegal. He laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. That is a bit dramatic, he said. It is just parking. I told him it was my job on the line, and I needed the boot removed today. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, file your appeal, pay the fines, and we will review it at the next meeting. That is the process. I told him I was requesting an emergency hearing under the bylaw provision. He sighed again. Fine, he said. I will check with the board and get back to you by tomorrow. I thanked him and hung up, and I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone on the board would see how absurd this was and force Helen to back down. The next morning, Rick called me back. "The board reviewed your request," he said. "We are denying the emergency hearing. The situation does not meet the threshold for imminent harm." I asked him how losing my job did not meet that threshold. He cleared his throat. "You have other transportation options," he said. "You can take a bus, get a ride, rent a car. The board does not consider this a health and safety issue." I felt the anger flaring hot and fast, but I kept my voice level. "So you are telling me the HOA can immobilize my vehicle, charge me storage fees while it sits in my own driveway, and refuse to let me dispute it until the next board meeting in 3 weeks, I said. He was quiet for a beat. "That is the process," he said. "If you do not like it, you can take it up with a lawyer," and then he hung up. I sat in my kitchen and stared at my phone, and I felt the cold knot in my stomach turning into something sharper and harder. They were not going to help me. They were going to let Helen run wild, pile on the fees, and hope I would either pay up or give up, but I was not going to do either. I opened my laptop and started drafting a formal complaint to the Washington State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. I included my timeline packet, my photos, my receipts, and a detailed breakdown of every procedural failure. I cited the Homeowners Association Act, the Consumer Protection Act, and every relevant statute I could find. I attached the fee schedule, the vague minutes, and the lack of notice. I filed it online, and I got an automated confirmation within minutes. Then I called the Kirkland City Code Enforcement Office and asked if the HOA had the authority to designate fire lanes on private property. The inspector I spoke to was direct and clear. "No," he said. "Fire lane designations are determined by the fire marshal and the city, not private associations. If your HOA is claiming a fire lane designation without city approval, that is a violation of municipal code." I asked him if he could come out and inspect. He checked his schedule. "I can be there tomorrow afternoon," he said. I gave him my address and thanked him. That night, I got an email from the tow vendor. It was short and impersonal. "Your vehicle has been flagged for tow away under HOA authorization," the email said. "Storage fees begin at midnight. Please contact our office to arrange payment and release." I checked the timestamp on the email. It had been sent at 8 p.m., more than 24 hours after the boot was applied. I took a screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. Then I called the vendor and left another message, this time with a clear warning. "I am disputing this boot under Washington Consumer Protection Law," I said. "Any attempt to tow my vehicle or charge storage fees will be reported to the State Attorney General and the City Code Enforcement Office. I recommend you verify your authorization with the HOA before proceeding." I hung up and felt a grim satisfaction. I was not backing down, and I was not paying a cent until someone could prove this was legal. The next afternoon, the city inspector showed up right on time. He was a middle-aged guy with a clipboard and a camera, and he walked around my driveway taking measurements and photos. I showed him the boot, the yellow sticker, and the curb with no markings. He nodded and made notes. Then he walked across the street and measured the distance to the nearest hydrant. 73 feet, he said. Well outside the standard 50-foot buffer, and even if it were not, the fire marshal would need to approve any private designation. This is not a legal fire lane. I asked him if he could put that in writing. He nodded and pulled out a form from his clipboard. "I will issue a notice to the HOA," he said. "If they continue to enforce a false fire lane designation, they will be fined by the city." I felt a surge of relief so strong I almost laughed. I thanked him, and he handed me a copy of the notice. "You should receive a formal report within 5 business days," he said. "Use it in your appeal." I took the notice and went back inside, and for the first time in 2 days, I felt like I had a real weapon. That evening, I got a call from Rick, the board president. His voice was tight and clipped. "We received a notice from the city," he said. "What did you do?" I told him I requested an inspection to verify the fire lane designation. He was quiet for a moment. "You are making this a much bigger deal than it needs to be," he said. "Just pay the fines and move on." I told him I was not paying anything until the HOA provided proof of proper notice, legal authority, and a valid contract with the tow vendor. He sighed, long and frustrated. "Helen is not going to like this," he said. I told him I did not care what Helen liked. I wanted the boot removed, the fines waived, and a formal apology for the harassment. He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You are not getting any of that," he said. "You are going to pay, or we are going to lien your property." And then he hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my timeline packet. I added the city inspector's notice, the vendor email with the delayed timestamp, and Rick's refusal to hold an emergency hearing. I was building a case that was airtight, and I was getting ready to deploy it. But I was not going to reveal my trump card yet. I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when Helen and the board had committed so far to their story that they could not walk it back without looking like fools or criminals. I was waiting for the hearing, the showdown, the moment when I could lay it all out in front of witnesses and watch their faces change. 2 days later, I got another email from the tow vendor. Your vehicle is scheduled for tow away at 6 a.m. tomorrow, the email said. Storage fees are now at $150. Please contact our office immediately to avoid further charges. I called the vendor and got a human this time, a woman who sounded bored and annoyed. I explained that the boot was applied without proper notice and that the fire lane designation was not legal. She cut me off. We do not adjudicate HOA disputes, she said. We have a contract, we enforce it. If you want to dispute the violation, take it up with the association. I told her I had a city inspector's notice proving the fire lane was invalid. She was quiet for a beat. Fax it to us, she said. I asked her for the fax number. She rattled it off, and I wrote it down. Then I scanned the inspector's notice and emailed it instead, since nobody uses fax machines anymore. I got an auto reply saying my email had been received, but no follow-up. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 and checked the driveway. The boot was still there, but no tow truck. I called the vendor and left another message. If you tow my vehicle without verifying the city notice, I will file a theft report with the Kirkland Police Department and a complaint with the State Consumer Protection Office, I said. You have been warned. I hung up and waited. 6 a.m. came and went. No tow truck. At 7 I got an email from the vendor. We are holding the tow pending HOA clarification, the email said. Please contact the association to resolve the dispute. I felt another surge of relief, but I knew this was not over. Helen was not going to let this go without a fight. That afternoon, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, printed on fancy letterhead, signed by Helen. The letter listed 3 violations: unauthorized guest parking, fire lane obstruction, and harassment of a board member. The total fine was $975, and the letter stated that failure to pay within 10 days would result in a lien on my property. I read the letter twice, then I took photos and added it to my evidence folder. The harassment charge was new, and it was obviously retaliation for my complaints and the city inspection. I called my attorney and read her the letter. She laughed, dry and sharp. That is textbook retaliation, she said. Keep it. It is going to help your case. I asked her when I should file the small claims suit. She checked her calendar. File it today, she said. The sooner you get a court date, the sooner you can force them to produce their records and their contract. I thanked her and hung up. Then I drove to the courthouse and filed a small claims complaint against the HOA and the tow vendor. The filing fee was $50, and the court date was set for 6 weeks out. I took my receipt and added it to the timeline packet. The next week was a blur of emails, phone calls, and paperwork. The HOA refused to remove the boot unless I paid the fines. The tow vendor refused to act without HOA authorization. The board president refused to hold an emergency hearing. I kept showing up at the HOA office, asking for records, asking for proof, asking for the vendor contract. Every time Helen would smile that cold, tight smile and tell me the same thing: 30-day processing period, per-page fees, appeals are non-refundable. I documented every interaction, every refusal, every retaliatory comment. I was building a timeline that was so detailed, so precise, that no one would be able to argue with it, and I was getting ready to deploy it. Then, one evening, I logged into the HOA portal on a whim, and it finally loaded. I clicked through to the violation history and I saw my entry: guest parking violation, fire lane obstruction, harassment of board member. I checked the timestamps. The guest parking violation was dated 2 weeks ago, which matched Helen's story, but the fire lane obstruction was dated yesterday, not the night the boot was applied, and the harassment charge was dated today. I took screenshots of every field, every timestamp, every edit log. And that is when I saw it. The violation entry had been edited after I disputed it, and the timestamp exposed it. The original fire lane entry was dated the night of the boot, but it had been modified yesterday to add clarifying language and a retroactive compliance deadline. The edit was signed with Helen's user ID. I stared at the screen, and I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was my trump card. Helen had edited the record after the fact to cover her tracks, and the portal had logged every change. I took screenshots of the entire page, the edit log, the timestamps, the user ID. I printed everything and added it to my timeline packet. Then I called my attorney and told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That is fraud. If she altered official records to support a false violation, that is a criminal act." You need to include this in your small claims filing and send a copy to the state attorney general. I told her I would, and I hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table, and I smiled, cold and sharp, because I finally had Helen exactly where I wanted her. The small claims hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a courthouse hallway right before the docket opened. I showed up early with my printed timeline packet, my screenshots, my city inspector's notice, and every receipt and photo I had collected. Helen was already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, her blue light jacket zipped up, her pink bucket hat tilted back. She saw me and her face went hard. Rick, the board president, was sitting beside her, looking uncomfortable in a suit that did not quite fit. I walked past them and sat on the opposite bench. Neither of them said a word. At 9 a.m., the bailiff called our case. We walked into the courtroom, and the judge was already at the bench, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She looked at the case file, then looked at us. "This is a dispute over HOA parking enforcement," she said. "Who wants to go first?" Helen stepped forward and launched into her prepared statement. "The defendant violated our guest parking policy and obstructed a designated fire lane," she said. "We applied enforcement measures in accordance with our bylaws and our vendor contract. The defendant has refused to pay the fines and has harassed board members in retaliation." The judge nodded and made a note. "Do you have documentation?" she asked. Helen pulled out a folder and handed it to the bailiff. The judge flipped through the pages, frowning slightly. "I see a violation log," she said. "I see a fee schedule. Where is the proof of notice?" Helen blinked. "We sent an email," she said, "and we posted it on the portal." The judge looked up. "Do you have a copy of the email?" she asked. Helen hesitated. "It was sent to all homeowners," she said. "We do not keep individual copies." The judge set the folder down. "So you have no proof that this specific homeowner was notified," she said. Helen's face flushed. "We followed our standard procedure," she said. The judge turned to me. "Your turn," she said. I stepped forward and handed my timeline packet to the bailiff. "Your Honor," I said, "I have documented every interaction, every refusal, and every procedural failure. I was never notified of the guest parking violation. I was never notified of the fire lane designation. The fire lane designation itself is invalid, as confirmed by the Kirkland City Code Enforcement Office." I handed the city inspector's notice to the bailiff. The judge read it slowly, her frown deepening. "This says the fire lane designation is not legal," she said. Helen shifted her weight. "That is a clerical error," she said. "We are working with the city to update the records." The judge looked at her, sharp and steady. "A clerical error," she said. Helen nodded. The judge set the notice down. "Continue," she said, looking at me. I opened my timeline packet and pulled out the portal screenshots. "Your Honor," I said, "after I disputed the violation, the HOA altered the official record to add retroactive compliance language. I submit it as a formal exhibit at the hearing," and watch Karen's face change. I handed the screenshots to the bailiff. The judge studied them for a long moment, her eyes moving back and forth between the timestamps and the edit log. She looked up at Helen. "Did you modify this record after the violation was issued?" she asked. Helen's face went pale, then red. "I added clarifying language," she said. "The original entry was incomplete." The judge leaned back in her chair. "Incomplete," she said, "or inaccurate." Helen opened her mouth, then closed it. The judge looked at Rick. "You are the board president," she said. "Were you aware of this modification?" Rick shook his head quickly. "No, Your Honor," he said. "I was not." The judge made a note, then she looked back at me. "What are you asking for?" she said. I took a breath. "I am asking the court to void the fines, order the immediate removal of the boot, and award me costs for the filing fee and attorney consultation," I said. "I am also requesting that the court forward this evidence to the State Consumer Protection Office for investigation." The judge nodded. "Granted," she said. "The fines are void. The boot will be removed today, or I will hold the association in contempt. You will be reimbursed for your costs, and I will be forwarding this case file to the State Attorney General with a recommendation for investigation." She looked at Helen, and her voice went cold. "Altering official records to support a violation is fraud," she said. "If the state finds evidence of a pattern, you and your board will face serious consequences. Do you understand?" Helen nodded, her face still red, her hands clenched at her sides. The judge banged her gavel. "Case closed," she said. "We are adjourned." Helen stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me. Rick followed her, his face pale and tight. I stayed behind and thanked the judge. Then I walked out into the courthouse hallway and felt the tension drain out of my shoulders. I had won. I had beaten Helen, beaten the HOA, and I had done it with nothing but paper and patience. I drove home and found a tow truck parked in my driveway. The driver was crouched beside my truck, unlocking the boot. He looked up and nodded. "Got the order from the court," he said. "You are all set." I thanked him and watched as he loaded the boot into the back of his truck and drove away. I stood in my driveway and stared at my truck, free and clear, and I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the State Consumer Protection Office. They had opened a case file on the Sequoia Terrace Design Review Association and were investigating complaints of predatory enforcement, altered records, and retaliatory fees. The letter included a case number and a request for any additional documentation. I sent them everything I had, every email, every screenshot, every receipt. A month after that, I got another letter. The state had found evidence of systematic violations and was negotiating a settlement with the HOA. The settlement included refunds for all homeowners who had been charged predatory fees in the last 2 years, a complete overhaul of the enforcement policy, and the immediate resignation of all finance committee members. Helen Parker was named specifically in the settlement, and she was banned from holding any leadership role in any Washington HOA for 5 years. I saw her one more time, a few weeks after the settlement was announced. I was checking the mail, and she was loading boxes into the back of her car. She saw me and her face went hard, but she did not say anything. She just slammed the trunk shut and drove away. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She had tried to bury me in notices and fees, and instead, she had buried herself. The HOA held an emergency election to replace the finance committee. A group of homeowners I had never met before ran as a slate, promising transparency and accountability. They won in a landslide. The new board president called me a week later and apologized for everything that had happened. "We are rewriting the enforcement policy from scratch," he said. "No more predatory vendors, no more surprise fees, no more retaliation. If you have any suggestions, we would love to hear them." I told him I would think about it, and I hung up. I had no interest in joining the board, but I was glad to see the neighborhood moving in a better direction. A few months later, I got a refund check in the mail from the HOA settlement fund. It was for $800, covering the fines I had been charged plus interest. I deposited it and used the money to pay for a weekend trip with my girlfriend. We drove up to the mountains, stayed in a cabin with no HOA, no rules, no Helen, and we spent 2 days hiking and laughing, and forgetting about tire clamps and tow yard rate sheets. It was the best weekend I had had in months. Back at home, life returned to normal. I kept my resident decal up to date, I parked in my driveway without fear, and I kept a copy of the settlement letter in my glove box, just in case. The new board installed clear signage for guest parking, updated the portal with real-time violation tracking, and published the vendor contract online for everyone to see. The tow company that had worked with Helen lost the contract, and a new vendor was brought in with strict oversight and transparent pricing. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. I ran into Rick at the mailbox one afternoon. He looked tired but relieved. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have pushed back on Helen months ago." I told him it was water under the bridge, and he nodded. "If you ever want to run for the board, let me know," he said. "We could use someone who actually reads the bylaws." I laughed and told him I would think about it, but I knew I never would. I had fought my fight, won my war, and I was done with HOA politics for good. The funny thing is, the karma moment I had been waiting for came a few weeks after the settlement. I was walking past the HOA office on my way to the mailbox, and I saw Helen through the window. She was packing up her desk, moving boxes, and her handheld scanner slipped from her hand and skittered across the pavement. She bent down to pick it up, and I saw her face, red and tight with frustration. She looked up and saw me watching. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw everything in her expression: anger, humiliation, defeat. I did not smile, I did not wave, I just kept walking. Sometimes the best revenge is just watching karma do its work. The neighborhood group chat lit up that week with rumors and gossip. People were talking about the settlement, the resignations, the new board. A few homeowners reached out to thank me for filing the complaint and forcing the investigation. One couple invited me over for dinner and told me they had been dealing with Helen's harassment for years, but had been too scared to fight back. "I am glad you did," the woman said. "You gave the rest of us permission to stand up." I told her it was not about permission, it was about documentation. "If you have the proof, you have the power." She nodded and promised to keep better records in the future. The new board published the minutes from the settlement meeting, and I read through them out of curiosity. The document was detailed and damning. The minutes record the reversal and the reason: fraudulent alteration of violation records, failure to provide proper notice, selective enforcement of parking rules, and retaliatory harassment of homeowners who filed complaints. Karen storms out when the vote goes against her, and everyone sees it. The minutes noted that Helen had objected to the settlement and had stormed out of the meeting when the vote went against her, and that several homeowners had witnessed her outburst and filed additional complaints. The board voted unanimously to accept the state settlement and to ban Helen from any future leadership role. The vote was recorded, the reason was clear, and the consequences were final. I kept my copy of the settlement letter in a folder with all my other HOA documents, and I check it every few months just to remind myself that I did the right thing. I did not vandalize anything. I did not threaten anyone. I did not break any laws. I just gathered proof, followed the process, and let the system do its job. And in the end, a city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce was all it took to bring the whole house of cards down. My girlfriend asked me once if I regretted any of it: the stress, the time, the fight. I told her no, I regret nothing. Helen tried to bury me in notices until I ran out of printer ink, but I buried her in proof until she ran out of lies. And that is a trade I would make every single time. Life in Sequoia Terrace is quiet now. The new board meets once a month, publishes the minutes online, and responds to emails within 24 hours. The parking rules are clear, the enforcement is fair, and the predatory vendor is gone. I still see the couple on the porch sometimes, the ones who watched the whole tire clamp scene like it was a show. They wave now, and I wave back. We are all just neighbors again, living our lives, parking our cars, and not worrying about surprise boots or retaliatory fines. I still work nights as a regional field technician, still drive my truck to job sites, still wear my green light jacket and my black trucker cap. My thin flashlight is still clipped to my pocket, and I still keep a coffee cup in the holder beside me. But now, when I pull into my driveway at the end of a long shift, I do not check for tire clamps. I do not look for yellow stickers. I do not worry about Helen standing at the curb with a clipboard and a smile. I just park, lock up, and go inside. And that simple, quiet normalcy feels like the biggest victory of all. Until next time, stay safe.